Should sex work be legal in the US? Why or why not? Technically it is legal, as long as you film it and just pay for the video, so then it is porn, which is fully legal. Family Guy taught me this. Remember kids, she's not a hooker if she's an actress. Mattress actress. George Carlin put it best, why is it illegal to sell something that is perfectly legal to give away for free? Selling is legal. Fucking is legal. Why is selling fucking not legal? God, I miss that man. Imagine the shit he'd say about 2020. He'd be cancelled. I've lived mainly in Australia and New Zealand and prostitution is legal. Nothing bad happened when the law changed. It took sex workers off the street and into legal employment, which is safer and more regulated. Trafficking did not suddenly become more common. It's a good thing. Exactly. Plus, if I'm a legal prostitute, I will report any illegal underground prostitution that is occurring because I have a financial incentive to do so. Plus, you're not worried about getting arrested or fined if you do speak up, and so are customers who see things that look illegal. Like, if they see someone who doesn't look 18, they can go straight to the cops without risk of getting arrested, and if she is 18, she doesn't need to worry because the cops would be like, oh yeah, she's 18, we checked instead of RAWR. Similarly, if an over 18 is being abused, etc., she can go to the cops, even. By the way guys, if you are enjoying this video so far, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It will help us out quite a bit, and if you don't enjoy the videos in the future anymore, you can always unsubscribe. Let's get back to the video. Edit. Please don't take this comment as gospel. I'm just a third year psych/economics student. Just because I wrote a paper does not mean I'm an expert. This comment is expressly just my opinion, based on the facts that I've read. I guess this what I'm writing about in the middle of the night, but I actually did a research paper on this topic a little while back. Places that have legalized sex work have seen a sharp decline in reports of sexual assault among both street workers and regular women. In Rhode Island, they accidentally legalized prostitution for 6 years, and during that time reports of rape dropped 31%. In places like Australia, the Netherlands, and Nevada, where they have legal brothels, reports of sex crimes in the general population have also decreased between 30-40% in the first few years and 25% in the years after that. There's also a similar decrease in rates of STD transmissions due to the health screenings and enforced condom use that customers have to go through at brothels. I've read a few papers attempting to disprove these facts, but their methodology seems flawed because they tend to interview registered sex offenders rather than the general population, so there's a question of if the men being interviewed have an unnatural proclivity for sexual violence compared to normal people. The biggest concern with legalizing sex work is human trafficking. A lot of experts argue that legal brothels will need women to work, and if they can't fill the best legitimately, then they'll do it however they can. This seems like a reasonable fear, but there hasn't been enough research into the topic. From what I've researched in the past for school, a lot of the arguments against legal prostitution seem flawed and nitpicky. I'd say the social benefits outweigh the cons, and prostitution should be legalized. It should be decriminalized, and there should be laws put in place to protect sex workers. Yes, arresting people for selling their bodies makes no sense. To function in this society, you already have to give about everything else up anyways. Also, don't see the logic behind it. And I'd argue that minors, construction workers, wrestlers, boxers, and models already are selling their bodies. Just in a manner that we for some reason feel is more acceptable than prostitution. As an ex-warehouse employee who now has a damaged back after 5 years of lifting/climbing/ECT, I have definitely sold my body. To be sexual is human, and prostitution has existed for like all of our history. Humanity is like one giant insecure individual. We can't accept and embrace these parts of who we are for some reason, and it only causes pain. There is nothing wrong with wanting another human's touch, and it could very well prove to be a valuable resource one day if we embraced it in a positive manner. Edit. I'm not justifying prostitution simply because it's old. I keep seeing that come up. I'm simply saying it's obviously been a part of human society for a long time and most likely isn't going anywhere, so we may as well regulate it and make it safe for those who take part. Okay TickleFap, can we all agree to stop using the whole prostitution is the oldest profession bullshit as a way of justifying it? How is that even a viable argument? Because every other comment right now is yes, I'm going to give the argument for no. Legal sex work drives up the demand for sex work, especially when sex tourism is allowed. In many cases this leads to an increase in human trafficking, which is the opposite of what most people want when they talk about legal sex work. I was thinking the same thing. Human trafficking is already a big problem. Making prostitution legal would probably just make it harder to track and prevent. Coupled with that, I think there would come in some serious issues with trying to keep it safe, especially for the prostitutes. Additionally, it's an industry that preys on poverty, and desperation like that is a breeding ground for crime. There may be safety regulations, but that doesn't mean those regulations won't be full of holes and weaknesses. There are plenty of regulations for businesses of all sorts, but how often are those followed to a T? I just don't think it's a good idea in a lot of different ways, but I do think we need to help these people who turn to prostitution to make ends meet, rather than making them into criminals. Sex buyers are the driving force behind sex traffickers. Normalizing the act of buying increases the demand for sex workers, which incentivizes sex traffickers. Places with legal prostitution have higher rates of sex trafficking. The only ethical position is to be against sex work. Legalizing it puts all our friends and families at greater risk of being sex trafficked. Likewise, pornography is already the largest form of legal sex work, and it is a blight on society. Kids as young as 5 are being exposed to it and end up with mental disorders and are put at increased risk of sexually abusing other kids and suicide. Children imitate their adult role models. The commercialization of sex is a direct causal factor in early age sexualization as they imitate their sex worker role models. Being pro-sex work is the anti-masker equivalent of sex trafficking, early age sexualization, child-on-child sexual abuse, mental illness, and suicide. Opposing the commercialization of sex would reduce these things. Here in Finland, at least as I understand it, it's legal to sell sex, but not to buy. It sounds dumb, but there's a logic. It's seen that if you're selling sex, you're at the bottom, and punishing you can't help you. However, if you're buying sex, you are abusing a person who is in a very bad situation in their life. Edit. Okay, apparently people can't read. I never said I thought this way. I don't have a strong opinion on the matter. I just stated this is how and why they do it somewhere else. I should phrased it better though. I understand that there are sex workers who genuinely enjoy their job and wouldn't trade it. However, there are also sex workers who are selling sex as a last resort, and the law is there to protect them. It is an unfortunate reality that many sex workers join the industry not because they want to, but simply because they need to make ends meet. It should be decriminalized, not legalized. Legalization creates means testing barriers for entry, much like in other industries, in the form of taxing, licensing, and further regulation that allow aspiring sex workers trying to make ends meet to be manipulated by pimps that can sort out all the paperwork for them. Decriminalization gives more autonomy to sex workers to decide the terms of their own employment. Under legalization, sex work is controlled by the government and is legal only under certain state-specified conditions. Decriminalization involves the removal of all prostitution-specific laws, although sex workers and sex work businesses must still operate within the laws of the land, as must any businesses. Edit. OFC legalization is the ideal end goal, but decriminalization is a better stepping stone for sex workers in the meantime. The industry will always persist regardless of legislation, so decriminalization currently seems to be the best option for harm reduction for sex workers. Sex work is extremely harmful and dangerous, and it shouldn't be a career people aspire to have. There are so many inherent risks to health, well-being, and safety, and I don't think legalizing it really solves any of the issues societies have with prostitution. That being said, prostitutes shouldn't be the ones punished when they are already such a vulnerable group. Instead, those who purchase their services should be punished because they are the ones creating the demand for sex work and they are the ones exploiting sex workers. If you decrease the demand for the service, then the service becomes less profitable and fewer people join that industry. You realize, though, that these dangers and vulnerabilities are a result of it being illegal, though, right? Abortion is dangerous when it happens in back alleys. Fighting is more dangerous outside the boxing ring. Mixing chlorine and bleach is dangerous outside the lab. I'm of two minds. On the one hand, I don't see a problem with what two consenting adults do. If one wants to pay another for sex, fine with it in theory. On the other hand, the situation is ripe for abuse in so many ways. It would have to be a licensed, inspected, regulated environment to make sure vulnerable people weren't being exploited and proper safety was being observed. Yeah, but people are already sex workers regardless of the legality of it. So either they are doing something illegal and therefore have no protection, or they are legally recognized and would be entitled to certain protections. If they are facing abuse, at least they can reach out for help without fear of prosecution. That's very true. The point I was getting at is that if it's legalized, we have to do a good job of regulating and licensing it for exactly those reasons. There are some serious repercussions that no one seemed to mention. By creating a society where selling your body becomes one of the best options for, mostly, women to get money, you create a very bad society. To name a few of the issues, selling intimacy creates a distorted population. See Japan. Economical disbalance between people having normal work and sex work. Less incentive for women to study meaningful subjects or become erudite. Strengthen gap between men and women. Just take a look at what prostitution did to countries like Thailand and Laos. There's quite a large percent of shop owners and landlords there who earned that money through a couple of years in prostitution. I don't think that it sets a good precedent for an economy to be built on these morals. Women can earn so much through prostitution for their entire family that it's estimated that up to 14% of the GDP of those countries is from the sex industry, and it might honestly be even higher, as for many tourists one of the draws of the country are its sex workers. Another example is Japan, where it's estimated that 10% of women in their 20s have appeared in the sex industry. I want women to study and bring something meaningful to societies instead of serving men. I don't inherently have anything against the industry, as I support people having the freedom to choose what they want to do. It is something, however, important to understand what the repercussions for society at large are. I'd only support this if everything earned through this is put straight back into education. Education obviously providing more options of success for people prepared to get downvoted to hell. To be honest, it's a very complicated issue that can't really be answered in just one comment. I would say no majority of sex workers aren't doing it of their own volition, but are forced into it either by situation or literally, since sexual slavery is very prevalent. Legalizing sets up rules and regulations, but these can end up being dehumanizing and still be used against sex workers working outside of the confines of the law. Which they likely will. I have my issues with the ethics and morality of sex work, but even with that aside, legalization is still not as good as it's chalked up to be. Amnesty International did an absolutely amazing report around 4ish years ago on this. It's a weird spot for me. I would prefer to see decriminalization instead of legalization. Not on any moral grounds, but rather who typically is involved in sex work. Many sex workers are in the industry due to a lack of ability to gain or retain other current legal work. If legalization happens, we won't see prostitution like it is now. It'll be back to a brothel style. Many of the same challenges that sex workers face in retaining a legal non-sex work job will work its way into that industry. With decriminalization, current sex workers would be able to continue on with their work, but have the ability to report crimes against them made by johns or pimps to the law without the fear of legal action being taken against themselves. Yes. The answer is simple. If you look back in time, My master's thesis is a written history on one of the largest red light districts, based off of the town size, that operated in the US in the early 20th century. Everyone operating inside of the legal district had to submit to health checks, paid for by the city, and their houses had to pass certain standards. There is written and oral testimony that madams were fiercely protective of the women that worked for them, sometimes going as far as not even allowing the patrons to curse in front of the girls. The women were protected by either, or both, the brothel's bouncer or the police that patrolled the area. So not only were the workers taken care of, it kept STD rates down and provided the city with a major financial boost. At one point outside investigators came to town to determine why there was such a large disproportion of money to residents in the banks. The income that the district generated was far more than people paying for sex. It created a booming real estate industry, skyrocketed alcohol sales, which the city could tax. It required constant help from outside industries such as laundry maids and errand boys, since the women that worked in the district were not typically allowed to shop downtown. If you're not okay legalizing simply for an individual's rights, you should really look into the amount of revenue possible from a legal red light district. The legalization of cannabis in some US states over the last few years is an excellent example of the untapped potential that's right at our fingertips, waiting. The extra taxes made off legalizing sex work could pay for better education, medical care, etc. The options are endless. During my research I found a man who was both doctor and coroner that lived before, during, and after the district. He was a part of the movement that ended up shutting the district down because he thought it would make the women change occupations. 2 decades after the closure, he wrote how wrong he was. Crime dispersed through the city, taking STDs with it. I do sex worker rights activism, and I feel very strongly that the answer is no, it should be decriminalized instead. I'm also making the assumption you're talking about prostitution, full service sex work. This is generally the view of most sex worker activists in the US. I'm going to do a basic breakdown of different models and why full decrim is the best. I'm going to speak from a US perspective, since that's what I know best. Criminalization, what the US has for the most part now, with the exception of a few legalized brothels in Nevada. We know criminalization doesn't stop sex work from happening. Like outdated anti-LGBTQ laws, like needing to wear X pieces of clothing from your assigned gender, or anti-contraceptive laws, that is Griswold v. Connecticut. These are laws based on perceived morality rather than violence or victims. Because sex workers then can't go to the police, there's a huge spike in sexual violence, murder, serial killers frequently target full service sex workers, wage theft, STD transmission, etc. People also often can't say they are getting trafficked. Yes, criminalization encourages sex trafficking. Personally, I think that prostitution is immoral. But I don't believe in unenforceable laws. Currently, banning prostitution just ensures that people struggling in poverty are even less protected. So as much as it pains me to say it, and as much as I wish there was no prostitution, I would say we should probably make it legal. Did you ever see Captain America: Civil War? I think it makes a good statement on laws. Laws make people into criminals that would otherwise not be criminals. Our prostitution laws make prostitutes into criminals, and our drug laws make drug addicts into criminals. People are going to do it regardless of what the laws say. Our laws just send people to jail. I think if it's official, taxed and monitored, not in a creepy way, for safety and security, then yes. If that's the career you desire/need to go into, then it shouldn't be stopped. But I also think that it should be an official profession, so it's safer for everyone involved. To be a patron, you should be checked before going in, almost like when wanting to buy a gun. A background check, a stability check, pat down, etc. should be done in order to make sure that the workers are kept safe. In the same token, if you wish to become a sex worker, you should have the same done to you in order to keep patrons safe. The rooms should have an actual security detail to them, so if something is going wrong, For any reason someone will come and assist in, say, dealing with a violent patron or worker, or if a medical issue has acted up, they should know how to deal with that. The tax is to make sure the businesses still pay their way, and the whole thing about safety is because the sex worker industry is a dangerous line of work. I just want those who want to be one, or even worse, need to be one, are safe and secure. TL. Doctor, yes, if it becomes a lot safer and official. Yes. It happens anyway, except it's riskier for the providers, and I imagine there is a lot more sex trafficking, though I don't know if legalizing it would minimize sex trafficking or not. However, if sex work was legalized, it would make it safer for all parties, especially the providers. The government gets its taxes it wants. The people who are doing this regardless of legal or not can now do it without having to worry about scams or worse. It's just a better situation for all who do this stuff. But maybe I'm wrong, and it could be a bad thing. Don't know how, but I haven't researched this topic to view all the pros and cons, just thinking it through logically. I refuse to believe that organized criminal groups would not take advantage of a legal sex area. I could see them dominating the places set up like that, no matter what supposed protections were given. I also feel that women in that work would be exploited more. Also, there's the issue that I doubt a state-sanctioned operation could really fill the need for that service, so there would still be illegal operations, and they would probably get worse as people looking to pay for sex would flock to those areas, and it could have all sorts of consequences for the women involved. There are so many ways legalizing it could go bad that I can't personally support such a move. Final argument from me, should the government really be in the business of legally helping men get laid? Helping women submit to and service those men? What would the average woman say about that? What kind of life is that? How many of those workers would choose so many better professions if they had the ability and support to do so? They already do. Now, is it easier or harder to exploit sex workers if it's inherently illegal? Isn't it harder for a harmed sex worker to go to the police or civil court for a remedy if their business is itself illegal? I did a speech on this for my public speaking class. I think it should be. You can pay someone for sex, but only if it's being recorded and sold for others to see. Seems like a pretty degrading loophole to me. Also, people in prostitution get raped/assaulted a lot of the time, and they can't go to the authorities about it because they could be charged for prostituting in the first place. Criminalizing it isn't going to put an end to it, and turning it into a regulated job will provide safety to people in that field of work. It seems like a no-brainer to me. I don't understand why it's such a debate. It should be legal and regulated. Anything is better than the current situation in which young girls are forced against their will to have sex with men. America's Puritan evangelical ideologies on sex relations only cause more harm than good. If women want to have sex for money, then that's their choice, and they should have the freedom to do as they choose. Prostitution, once legalized, would be beneficial to both parties involved, and children wouldn't be sold into the sex trade. Crazy. I go to the controversial section and still 99% of the answers are yes. Obviously there is a huge disconnect between real people and Redditors, as most people do not believe this should be legal. I think this is due to age. Sex work being popularized in social media is leading young people to think it's an act of freedom and individual power, while older and more middle-aged people are thinking in terms of lifelong consequences and overall perception. Sex work degrades sex. Being hedonistic is bad for society on any level. Thinking that sex is transactional is bad for parents, children, and everyone else. No one wants their daughter to be a hooker. If you sympathize with any stranger in a real way, you know that being a sex worker is not in their best interest literally 100% of the time. It is a fleeting occupation that gets rougher and rougher as life goes on, and teaches women that their looks and sexual acts are what are truly desired in culture. It is completely objectifying yourself by willingly committing these acts. Most people understand this in real life, where we see years-long consequences of our friends and cousins attempting to proclaim power while getting treated for hepatitis. Yes, legalization may help some of these issues, but it won't remove them. Do we as a society really want to encourage people to fuck, just for the heck of it? Do we want people to think that human life is sacred? Do we want people to value the individual? These are the tough questions in response to your question, and Reddit's mind of victimizing everyone is limiting their rational view on the subject. It shouldn't be criminalized to sell sex, but it should be illegal to buy it, in a way that sex workers who are victims of trafficking have a safe way out. I feel like a very small minority of sex workers in the world actually want to be sex workers, and in my opinion, if you pay someone to have sex with you that otherwise wouldn't, because they are desperate for money, it says a lot of gross things about you as a person. Like, I feel like, if I was ever put into a position of power that would allow me to legalize sex work, I'd much rather create some kind of program to provide desperate people with the things they need to survive, rather than make it legal for a depraved freak to take advantage of that desperation. Edit, because I forgot to mention, everything I just said about consent and all that is made especially true by how unemployment works at times, as I've seen very few, thankfully, instances where it was like a person had no job, tried to get unemployment, was offered a job in some way in sex work, and was denied unemployment because they had access to a paying job. I'll try to find it later, because it really was kind of disturbing. But also, if sex work is work just like all other kinds, wouldn't that be legal if sex work is? This is the end of the video. Thank you guys for staying with me till the end. If you enjoyed watching this, you might as well watch these too.